Okay, hi guys, and welcome to the Live Good Enough podcast. I'm Ross, this is Joe, and as always, we'll be going through the top articles that we've been talking about this week on Live Good Enough. If you're new here to Live Good Enough, it's all about successful living with balance. The success is not something that we'll tell you what to do, it's not an instruction, it's whatever that means to you, and the balance is all around how you choose to do that. But Joe, if for the viewers that are viewing this podcast and they can see you in a much more sunnier clime than I am sitting in here, tell us a little bit about where you are and what you've been getting up to.
Beautiful part of Suffolk, very near Southwold actually. Right now,
Yeah.
I'm on route to. I'm working my talk club hat on today. I'm setting up an event. We're doing a collaboration with an artist in Norwich, and talk club's a men's mental health charity. In order to create safer spaces for men to be able to share how they're feeling, and we're bringing to life an artist's first exhibition. So that's going to be a really cool thing. But we're doing a partnership with a beer brand in Norfolk, and I'm just off to pick up some beer. So that's where I am at the moment.
Not a bad day. Picking up beer in the sunshine sounds pretty good to me. Perfect. So we'll jump straight in. And so last week we went through kind of like everything, but what we've had the chat between ourselves, and what we thought would be good to is look at the three articles that we felt made the most impact during the week and discuss those. And the first one we're going to look at is all about volunteering. Now this article was all around kind of like thinking about volunteering, but you know, a lot is discussed often about the recipient of that volunteering work, and while that's the main reason that volunteering's done. I think an offshoot that sometimes we don't necessarily talk about is the benefit it has to the volunteer themselves, you know, and the benefit that they have once they are involved in that volunteering. So we've been talking about this week about kind of like you know, the benefits of being a volunteer for an organisation. You know, we talk about enhanced well-being, we talk about building new skills, boosting career prospects as well, personal growth and self-confidence. So Joe, your thoughts on kind of volunteering and probably, you know, when you speak there about kind of, you know, your work for Talk Club, that's actively a volunteer. You know, tell us a little bit kind of around what the benefit that's given you.
Yeah, I have to say it's a bit of a double-edged one for me. And I'll be completely frank. I think volunteering is fantastic, because it can give so much to individuals, and obviously it's so important on a financial level for charities to be able to get the resources that they need. But therein lies for me a really fundamental issue, which is that actually for me, volunteering also means you're not putting a value, or there isn't a value, on somebody's services for money. And actually that obviously sits behind, you know, that's often people are like, well, yeah, that's not the whole point of volunteering. It's because it comes from an altruistic place, a place where I want to give back and I want to do that. But that, again, comes from a place of being in a more, you know, I would say more, you know, a very privileged position where you're able to give up time in order to give that to somebody else, and then to choose where your time goes, rather than that being somewhere else. And so, you know, personally, I've been very fortunate that I've been able to volunteer for charities, and I too have been actually really frustrated. And I'll bring one example to life. It was a mate who worked for a large national charity. I'm not going to name who that was, and he said his experience was that you know, never had he seen the world work less hard to make the world a better place than inside a large charity. And then sort of juxtapose that with the world of advertising, which I've been in for like 15 years. And he said, never have I ever seen the world work so hard to make the world a worse place, you know, just through selling products. And it is this whole thing between actually what does it mean? And is it just, for me, I agree with everything that we've said here in terms of the benefits for volunteering. But I think it also raises for me a number of questions around, as long as every volunteer understands and there's a fair share, I suppose, and everyone knows what they're getting, that's also fine. But if you're taking advantage of people's time, that's where it can be challenging. But the benefits have been absolutely massive. There's no doubt about that from my perspective. You know, you do feel as if you're giving back, but equally, you know, who's that then serving? Like, how does that? You know, that's great for individuals, but like, should we be doing it to feel brilliant ourselves, or should it be about the impact that we can deliver for the people that we actually should be doing it for? And then,
Yeah, it's a really interesting point. And so I think what we're saying is that, when we go into something like this, we should have clear expectations from all parties around what is going to be expected from the volunteer and what is going to be expected from the organisation that will be, that volunteer will be working with. Would that kind of be if someone was thinking about it, would that kind of be a top of the list when it comes to kind of tips around, what to ensure you've got in place before you start, do you think?
that's a really, really good point, Ross. Thanks for cutting through a lot of my words. As in, like, making sense of it, which is exactly that. Yeah, clear expectations and understanding of the charity's role, and the resources and the support you will need as a volunteer, and what the volunteer is there to do and what they're there not to do. And I think as long as they're respected, and that is clear, then that's obviously hugely valuable for all parties. So as I've said, the lots of things that we do in our daily lives and the communities we're part of, rely heavily upon volunteer in order to be able to function, and there's so much benefit that comes from that. But I would say, lack of clarity around roles and responsibilities and those expectations is
I think kind of like a good
big one.
Kind of place to start is that when you're looking at places to volunteer at, is that often the ones that have a clear volunteering policy, a clear volunteering procedure, are generally the ones I think to go to. Where it's not ambiguous. It's kind of like, it's not just a kind of like, can you come every Thursday on for a couple of hours. It's where there's a clear route, because often I think what this shows is that they've been really experiencing in nurturing volunteers through that process, to the fact that they have a whole kind of procedural stuff already kind of laid out, and I think that just gives some reassurance as well. But I think one of the aspects of what the article spoke about was around the fact that sometimes in those periods where we may feel that where we don't have value, or we don't have purpose, sometimes it's quite common for people when they're feeling a little bit off to, when it comes down to it, is what are your values, what are your purpose? And I think volunteering can be kind of like a great gateway into trying to figure out what those things are, but then also that kind of reciprocal ability whereby if I'm not feeling at my best right now, but I can give myself in a way where I can create value for someone else. I know in my own experience that is a good kind of, I guess, jump start on the battery sometimes to get you in a place where you feel that you're making some traction. Would you agree on that?
I couldn't agree more, and I think that's a really important point. I think that's, again, maybe if we were to frame that around expectations, it's also a safer environment where you can lower expectations.
Yeah,
it's what is expected of you because you are giving your time.
Yeah,
and therefore that's almost feels safer to explore, to have to try something different, try something new, and by doing that you can build obviously greater confidence in your own self. You might be able to build other things out in a way that you might not have been able to if you were pressured by an employer or someone else. And actually I think that's really valid. And then the other point I would just add on the sort of more structure and those sort of charities where that is in place, I completely hear that, and I agree to a certain extent, but I think that then misses out a lot of causes or a lot of places where actually that clarity doesn't exist, because a lot of people again, we know that most charities are very under-resourced and they haven't had the time to think clearly about what they are. And actually, that's I'm just saying, as a volunteer, we can own our own boundaries and say actually, this is what I can give and what I cannot give. And actually, maybe I'm not again saying it has to all be on the individual, but there's a joint role between the individual and the organisation to say, this is what I can do, this is what I can't do, and let's and have that conversation. Because again, the challenge, I've been there a lot in charities, is again, you've said it, like you literally you won't have a clear role because the charity needs many different things on many different levels. And so actually, is it about just that open dialogue, creating a space where you can have a conversation, whoever it is you're involved with at the charity, to say, I'm not comfortable with doing this. It's about the right culture within that space to create it.
Yeah, that's a really good point. I hadn't thought of that. And I think, like you say, if there's not that kind of formality in their how they're set up. It's about the open conversation, and I think you kind of get a gut feel for things
Mm,
sometimes. You know, maybe on that first interaction when you're asking someone, you're inquiring about volunteering. You know, you'll get a gut feel. I think. You know, hopefully it's for a cause that you feel passionate about. I think that's the thing also to mention is that, you know, in my experience, the things that I have gone into whereby I already have a passion or an interest or it
mm,
aligns with my values, you know, makes that whole process a lot easier for both parties, I think. But then, like you say, also having that open conversation and going with your gut, you know, if it's not those things in place, um, I think are huge as well. And I think one of the other things that the article spoke about as well was that also using it, you know, if we ever think about that we want to kind of change our career paths or change the things we want to do, and maybe we haven't got maybe skill sets or time spent in a certain niche that we'd really like to get into, volunteering can be a kind of again a gateway into that. Would you agree?
and that's been my experience for sure. I volunteered and worked with different charities in areas where I thought I had a personal passion, and that
Mm,
then led me to actually explore that and be like, yeah, you're right. This is an area I want to focus on, and how do I do that in order
yeah.
to link to my career? And I just wrote down maybe three things that might be really simple, but it's like maybe if you're thinking about volunteering or working in a space, then I'd ask, why am I doing this? What is it I'm doing it for? What do I want to get out of it? So what's the actual thing I want out of it? And then how can I help? And maybe if we know those three things, then again you'd have a clear understanding. Like, okay, so then you can go to the say this is the things I want to do, or look at the
Mm.
thing there, and that might be helpful.
Yeah, no, definitely. So yeah, great talk, great conversation around a quite important subject, I think. And like you say, there are many organisations that are looking for assistance in certain things. So if
Mm,
you're listening to this, watching this, and you still have a skill set and you want to get involved, it could be something to think about. But we're going to move on to the next subject that we were talking about, and it's kind of a double sided thing. So it was effectively about friendship,
mm,
but it was taking an aspect of that which was listening. And I spoke about my experiences in that you know in the past I have been quite quick to go to the fix rather than the sitting in the space and the listening. And I kind of said that it was in no way the intention there was no way different, that I just wanted to move on in the conversation, but the innate kind of want there was to help the other person who may be sitting in the challenge or the problem, because in my own experience that works well for me. So
mm,
sometimes we that sometimes treating people how we want to be treated isn't always the right way to go, which goes against everything that we're probably told about treat everyone as you want to be treated. So the article kind of talks about a little bit about my journey on you know, interrupting my own thought patterns or intentions when it comes to listening to a friend or a colleague or a loved one, that and acknowledging that it's more helpful more often than not than to sit in that space as the listener, not the fixer. I don't know about your experience in that, Joe.
couldn't Personally, I just thank you so much for bringing this up. I think it's a really, really valuable and important topic. I think it's a skill that we don't um, focus enough on in education. And actually, everyone should be. My view, personal, is we should all be qualified in active listening. We'd all be
Mm,
far better if we understood really deeply what that actually is, and we practice. Because again, it's a skill. It's something that needs to be practiced. I think instinctively. I mean, Ross, you and I have talked a bit about ADHD and about our own journey with that. And actually, I acknowledge that my instinct is exactly the same as yours. I want to fix, I want to solve, I want to, and my excitement about like maybe finishing someone else's sentences or something else is something that I'm doing not out of like A, because I don't care about them. B, as in it's not because I don't care about them or because I think I know the answer. It's because that's my form of connection. Like I'm showing them that
mm,
I'm interested and passionate. And actually, but what signals are you actually sending?
Mm.
Whereas when, if you are just there, and it's a skill that I have had formal training in, and most
Yeah.
recently I'm actually training, going through coaching training. I'm finding that so powerful. And it's interesting what you said about some friends or some people in our lives might want that solution voice, and I think then that's about us. For me, it's being comfortable asking the question, "What is it that you want from me now?"
Yeah.
So, what role is it that you want me to play in this conversation? Because I could play many as your friend. I am
Mm.
always here to listen. I'm
Yeah.
always here for you. I could offer you a solution, but actually, I wonder if it's, would that be helpful, or what do you want? And I think, again, that might seem like then you're putting it on the friend and to ask the same thing, and if they don't know, that's also okay. But then let's talk that through.
No, I think
But I,
that's been completely powerful for me. That having that question of, do you want advice or just for me to just listen is my kind of thing that I will use to interrupt now, because it interrupts
mm,
both the conversation and my thought patterns of where I would normally go. So again, completely relate to you. It's the excitement of someone saying something and you kind of knowing, got some really great ideas that you've just thought out in a few seconds, which you can't wait to share with someone,
mm,
and then, and the article speaks about, when we don't do this, we don't sit in it and have this listening period, we're looking at things like overshadowing the feelings that the person has, that you're not kind of, sitting with them in it.
mm,
Creating dependency. So constant problem solving for your friend can create a dependency. So there could be that they're not kind of dealing through their own things, and also misalignment. Your idea of solution might not align with your friend. I'm excited about this idea that I've got, but it might not be a good fit for you. Eventually. So it's a tricky one, and exactly what you say. We're not learned this skill at school. I think listening is truly underrated as a skill to have alongside some of the
mm.
skills we hold in higher regard.
Ross, I couldn't agree more. And I think I also wonder. I know we're very biased because we're British. But I wonder if there's a
Mm,
lot of this baked into British culture. In a
maybe.
lot of, and potentially like, we're where I think we find not having answers or solutions very uncomfortable.
Mm,
I think we find ambiguity very,
yeah.
very uncomfortable. Maybe I know I'm generalising like massively, and maybe I'm speaking for myself, but I definitely saw the world much more binary. Like it's
Mm,
either this way or that way, and actually I've started to try and see the world in a more grey. That like my own ideas or my own views can be one thing as well as what yours are, and that's also okay. It doesn't have to be the
mm,
same ways, and particularly with friends, I think the other thing is that we can disagree on things as well. So listening
mm,
doesn't also mean like,
mm,
and it doesn't mean that you have to agree with what the other people are saying. It's that you're paying attention. I think I think and you're fully there, fully present. For me, I think
mm,
there's so many things that we're not like. Even when we say, oh yeah, I'm I know as a dad as well, and I think there's probably two elements I'd love to draw upon. One is as a father, and whether I'm actively listening to my kids. And a
yeah.
lot of the time, I can say no, I'm not. I might be on my phone, or I might be doing something else, and then but I'm trying to notice that more. Be like, are you actually giving them the real attention that they need, or are you? You are trying to do two things at once, and if you're always trying to do two things at once, or then you're never, as you've just said, like that, if you're not giving your full attention and really listening and being there,
Mm,
then the message they're receiving is then that they're not as important. And I think with all friendships, we're wanting to show that person they are important to us. So it can be a lot about body language, a lot about and we also find eye contact, challenging. So it might even go for a walk, and it doesn't mean that you have to have eye contact the whole time, but it does mean that you're not on your phone. Your phone
yeah.
doesn't. And I think it was Simon Sinek did a really interesting thing a couple of weeks ago and shared this thing about if your phone is the thing that goes on the table, even if it's bottom face down, even when you're talking with a friend, actually what you're saying is
Mm,
that's important
mm,
versus putting
yeah.
your phone on do not disturb, putting it in your pocket. and then just being there, and nothing else is important. I think I've started to see that a lot with the work I've been doing with Talk Club and in the coaching space, that the power of attention is quite remarkable, and which I link directly to active listening.
I also kind of think that this is kind of a good skill to have even when you're not in conversation. So I think this is a good skill to have when you're on your own, in that, if something comes up for yourself, maybe there's not a need to immediately go into solving mode for yourself and to just sit for a while. I don't know. I just feel that it hasn't got to be a two person or a 3-person situation. I think it can be with yourself in a way to manage your own thoughts and trying to be a bit more mindful, in that you have the challenge or the problem and you sit with it in a while. I think, what I've learned over the odd 40 odd years is that, not necessarily jumping to action in the first instance will bode quite well, and sitting and sitting in it, just to, even if there's nothing really that comes out of it, just giving it some time. I think we always, well, I know I always kind of see sometimes time wasted if there's not an action attached to it, sometimes. And I think I'm getting better at that, but I think that sometimes that's where the gold lies, I think.
Yeah. Thank you for sharing that, Ross. I completely agree. I think, and I love the reflection of it not needing to be just 2 people, but actually could be something we can do and practice on ourselves and our own thoughts. And yeah, I'd hopefully build on that and say, yes. And one thing I'm reflecting on is not jumping also straight to the why, because actually the why might be not something I can answer, and it's more confusing. So, if it's my own thought about something and I go, well, why am I thinking that? And then I'm trying to solve it again, solving. And actually, if I think maybe it could be more where, or at what time or what situation is going on that I'm feeling this or thinking it, and is it more related to the context? So the active listening can be asking those questions that can give us more understanding about, why it's taking. It will lead to the why, but it doesn't have to start there. If that makes sense.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, it's definitely an interesting one. And, if anyone out there wants to get involved with learning more about active listening, just a quick Google, you can find lots of stuff on it. It hasn't got to be a course or something.
Sorry, jump in, Ross. Can I just make one recommendation?
Of course you can.
So it's a book called Time to Think by Nancy Klein.
Okay.
And I again have a lot of the work that I've been reading about this is formed based on her work. It's really, really interesting. Yeah.
Good place to start then.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. I'll link that up as well. So if you go into the notes, you'll find that as well. Finally, the one that got the most traction this week was about smartwatches. A little bit off field, but it's the conversation was around, a smartwatch is something that we see on most wrists day to day, and very little of us kind of look at the time on them because they're filled with all these other gadgets and things that we're able to use, and predominantly around health and tracking and goals and goal setting. And I think the world that we live in now promotes their usage in a way to enhance yourself, enhance your well-being, enhance everything. But some of my own experiences have been with these devices is that whilst they can do a lot of good in a lot of areas, depending on how you view them or how you see them, or just your own personality or tendencies, sometimes they were anxiety raising in some circumstances. So the article goes through kind of like the appeal and what these everyone knows what smartwatches pretty much do, and you can check out the article for that. But kind of like the data overload sometimes that we have on things, especially around health. We all want to kind of live the best life that we can, whatever that means to you. But things like information overload, do we need this amount of data in order to live well? Yes, we live in a world now where, optimization is something that's it's spoken about in lots of different areas. But with health, I feel that it's kind of something where we're always inundated with messages about, just raise that up more and raise this up more and raise this up more. And, often, sometimes with not much medical backing, that's not always the case. And also, where do we draw the line where we become dependent on data? Now, I know that if there's a specific medical issue or health issue, we have to work by the data. We have to work by, the health information that we have. But I'm just talking on a general day-to-day basis for someone that wants to live well. Are these devices helpful, or can they also be a hindrance, do you think?
Yeah. Wow. It's massive.
It's quite a broad subject. So
yeah, and I think it relates really well to sort of why we're here, Ross. Like, to live good enough, and what does that really mean? And for me, absolutely, like, good enough doesn't mean good enough is not living with a smartwatch. Personally, I found that I haven't actually used a proper smartwatch. I've used watches that give data before. My wife has one. I see them, but I've actively chosen not to do that because I know that for me, I would need to be basically restricting its capability so much. I'm like, well, why would I be getting it in the first place? So, for example, I need to switch off all notifications because they would just overwhelm me. And actually, I'm trying to get away from, I don't want these, my phone is something I'm trying to get away from versus all the time. But obviously the having it on your wrist is a really, as I said, this whole sort of like the ease, the lack of friction that it creates, the user journey, all those things are amazing. Like how technology enables us. At the same time, what you're saying completely around the data overload, and that's something that that's how I relate to them. I think personally is that smartwatches. I've actually seen one recently that looks like a real watch, and I was actually really interested in that. And then I was like, God, that might become an obsession. The classic thing of like sleep and how well have I slept tonight and everything else. And I'm like, again, is that something again just going to overwhelm me? Like, what is going on? And so I think the setting it up as like there are huge benefits, but again, this all comes from a place of understanding what they are before you jump in, and perhaps the awareness of appreciating that and knowing what you feel might be right for you.
I think the classic example for me was that when I had one once, I'd been doing the sleep measure and stuff, and I'd woken up one day and I felt, I've had this fantastic sleep. I feel way better than I've done before. Looked at my watch and it was like, no, it was crap. You had crap sleep. And I was like, well, I felt really good in that respect. I felt I had good sleep, and then you're telling me not to. And my concern is that, the data is obviously generalized, isn't it? It's generalized to a user base, that based on all these people that we've looked at, we think this is the average that you should be doing everything. And again, it just goes down. It's not. And I know we're getting better and better with the technology now where it can be more personalized, but I think with a lot of these things, they are quite generalized. They don't necessarily speak to us individually.
Yeah. Obviously, I think we're moving into a time where that will become less and less. And actually the devices that we interact with and everything else will become much more smart about like if we let it, if we allow it the access to that information. And I suppose in that way, then it's a personal decision around your own data. But and the role that technology plays in facilitating that. And I think it's a really interesting. I mean, again, I've got a smartphone. I know that actually the smartphone has got everything I need on it, and if I decide I want to use it, then that's good. I equally see the benefit of having a smartwatch, and I think there's so much around that, but I know I can only speak as a sample of one for me that I know that actually it might cause me more overwhelmed than actually it's there to solve. And I listened to a podcast a couple of weeks ago that, again, I'd really recommend. It was a Hidden Brain is the podcast, and it was one about the value of subtraction. And it was about the fact that we as a society are really, we seem to be, the whole world is optimized on additive. So adding, or, growth, etc. But actually, what about reducing? And this, for me, relates exactly to what we're talking about with these smartphones and the amount of data that we're getting. And, it's do we need all of it, or do we need to be more in tune with how we actually feel in relation to the natural world, rather than to the data that we're getting from a digital world? Or do we? These are the questions I'd probably ask about it, if that makes sense.
Yeah, the example I had recently was, and I think it shows how society built is kind of leans us towards that usage. Is that I'd had enough with my phone. I thought about getting one of these like more dumb. They call them dumb phones, don't they? Or and I'd looked at the ones I had when I was they brought out the Nokias that I used to have when I was like 20 or something like that. And I thought, oh, I'll use one of those. I can only text, I can only make phone calls and play Snake if I wanted to. If you're of that age and would know what that was. But then I thought, and I sat down and I thought, well, my heating and my boiler, I've got to have an app for it. It hasn't got WhatsApp on, and that's how my daughter chooses to communicate with me most of the time. I've got all these other apps that are embedded in my life, where those companies have chosen to go fully app, communication via app. So I was like, well, I can't do it again, because I'm tied into all these things. So it's really interesting. Even sometimes when our intention is to go down there, I feel like kind of everyone else around us is going, no. You've got to use that phone, because otherwise you can't do all these things. So I'm sure there's a way around that, and kind of carrying a laptop around with it probably is the other option. But we're not necessarily set up today to walk that path. I think sometimes very easily.
No, I think it's a really love the whole sort of dumb phones, and particularly for children is a massive topic at the moment.
Yeah.
I've seen a huge rise in that. But I also, again, I'd probably go back to what I said at the beginning and not contradict it, but about actually maybe there is more agency, that I need to take more responsibility, that a smartphone is really beneficial and a smartwatch is really beneficial. And actually, when I said about is it worth it, the value equation or the cost benefit, actually it is probably worth it, even if I do switch off all the notifications, because there's so much more I get from it. But then I get it's down to me to put in place my own boundaries around what that is. So
yeah, my phone is now, it's been like that for a while, but it's kind of, I've tried to set up intentionally. So I have no notifications. And like for email update, I have to go into the app to receive the update. And that's the same for social media or whatever I else choose to use it. And for me, that works quite nicely, because I have got these ding, 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 dings all the time. Most of the WhatsApp communications I'm in, I mute. And so I can go into it at a certain time and choose to check them. That's something that works for me as well. And it's just finding things that work for you. And, we've all had periods of time when we've used something or a phone or an app or something, and that's been more of a pain in the arse than, given any benefit. And I think that's kind of a good way to kind of measure it, I think, sometimes.
Yeah, I love that. Thanks for sharing, Ross. I think there's some really useful tips there.
So they're the three main things. Obviously, if you haven't checked them out, you can go onto the website. We also spoke about AI and, around, all the conversation seems to be about the doom and gloom, but what are the quiet things going on in the background in lots of different areas where AI actually is doing a whole lot of good. And the one we just launched today was all about guilty pleasures. I'm a big believer that we shouldn't have guilty pleasures. Why are we even calling them guilty pleasures? If they bring you joy, own them, celebrate them. And, the people that you're worried about thinking that they're going to be naff or whatever probably shouldn't be the people that you're taking advice from anyway. So get those people out of your life. But yeah, check out livegoodenough.com. You'll find out all the articles. We post an article every weekday, and then we have this conversation every Friday at the end of the week, where we put a little bit more discussion around it. And we'd like to have you in the discussion as well. So please feel free. You can send us a voicemail over on Spotify if you choose to do that. You can comment on YouTube or any one of the social media feeds where you'll see this video or this podcast. But yeah, Joe, enjoy your beer, enjoy the rest of your day, and I'll catch you next week.
Thank you so much. Take care.
Take care.